Hello students, welcome to week 5 for COM 425, Organizational Communication. This week we're looking at managing the conflict process within organizations and what those processes look like when we are negotiating conflicts within organizations and outside organizations. As you look at the week 5 agenda, you'll see that we are reading chapter 9. We're watching 3 videos related to building organizations, conflict processes, and how we manage conflict interpersonally. We have 3 assignments due this week. Discussion board number 5 is due on Friday, with reply posts due on Sunday. Case study number 3 is due on Sunday. And then also on Sunday, you are completing your critical assignment topic rationale. It's not the actual critical assignment. It is rather the rationale that tells me what you plan to do and explains what you plan to do. As we move into discussion board number 5, it's important to know that when I look at participation, I'm looking for you not only to have an opportunity to think critically and to critique and support arguments and conduct analyses yourself. Rather, I'm looking for this collaborative learning environment. You've all been doing a great job at really getting at this and really honing in on it this term. I just wanted to reiterate that the point of the discussion board is to facilitate it in class discussion if we were meeting face-to-face. So this week our prompt asks you to think of a conflict that you were involved in at work recently. And recently we're using that term loosely. So if you can't think of a recent workplace conflict, think of one that maybe you experienced before or something that you've experienced any time in the workplace that resulted in some type of conflict or awkwardness that you needed to resolve. Describe this situation in detail and discuss how the conflict was resolved. How would you characterize the approach that was used to resolve the conflict according to what you've learned in the reading this week, as well as talking about how the situation could have been handled better if you had access to or knew about some of those concepts that were discussed in the book. Remember to focus on the communication aspect of your response, not maybe how the conflict made you feel or what resulted in workplace processes and things like that. We're talking about the communication aspect of the conflict. When you look at case study number 3, I put a little synopsis of it up here, but it's really looking at how you handle and analyze communication during a performance appraisal meeting, really a performance evaluation of an employee. So the person we're looking at is Geraldine McDowell. She's a charge nurse at a medical center at a large city hospital. She works the afternoon shift and in a general medical and surgical floor. She supervises RNs, LPNs, and nurse aides. Geraldine really is about to attend her annual performance with Ruth Knowlton, her supervisor, and wants to look at how she's thinking about how the performance appraisal will occur. Now, on Blackboard, goes into a lot more depth, the expectations, how she needs to think about managing her communication and such. What you need to do is to answer the discussion questions in your actual response to moving this down a little, in your response to the case study. Specifically, you should look at what strategies Ruth could use in providing feedback to Geraldine that are conducive to a positive organizational communication environment. How will the feedback and the communication she gives Geraldine improve her performance and not cause conflict or dissatisfaction? What strategies would you use to recommend to Geraldine as she enters in the performance review meeting? What kind of performance appraisal system do you recommend? What changes should the nursing department at the hospital make to enhance the role development process for nurses? And what conflict management strategies would you apply to the situation? Remember and do not forget that you do need to have at least 2 outside sources. So I'm looking for an analysis of this situation for you to determine and tell me what are the best communicative practices both parties can use in this meeting. If you have any questions on that, reach out to me, but that's what I'm really looking at. What best communicative practices can both parties in this potential or hypothetical scenario use going into the performance appraisal meeting? The critical assignment rationale is attached here. You'll notice it might look a little awkward, and that's fine. What you're doing, again, is you're selecting one of the organizational communication topics. The list is provided here as well as in Blackboard, listed in Blackboard. Once you've identified one of those topics, you then are to choose from one of the 3 approaches to the study of organizational communication to conduct and to complete your critical assignment. So you'll select, for example, let's say you pick participation and decision making as your topic. Then you will select either the systems approach to organizational comm, the cultural approach, the critical, or the critical approach to conduct your paper on it. Once you do that, then that's when you will develop your paper that's due in week 7. All you're doing this week is identifying the topic of organizational communication you want to pick from the list. That's the long list you see. And then picking if you want to use the systems approach, cultural approach, or critical approach to writing to completing your paper. Once you've selected those 2 things, then you're going to write a 300-word rationale. And what I mean by rationale is just a 300-word explanation and justification for the 2 topics that you've selected. I want to know why you picked your topic and why you picked your approach. That's what I'm looking for in this assignment this week. You're not writing the paper, just telling me what topics you picked and why. The paper, when you get to that in week 7, and what you should start working on from this point forward, is an analysis of an organizational communication process and or theory from the list you'll select this week, and then also an approach you'll use to analyze that theory or model. So if you picked conflict resolution styles, and you analyzed it according to the cultural approach, you'll tell me how conflict resolution styles, or what those are in organizational communication, are beneficial to the org comm perspective, and looking at it from the cultural approach, why you think so. That's what you would do in a nutshell if you picked those 2. So what I'm looking for this week is a 300-word rationale telling me why you picked your topic and your approach. I want you to also include a list of at least 4 or 5 sources you plan to use. You don't have to do anything with those sources, but just plop them in the paper for this week in proper APA. Then you'll begin working on your paper. And like I said, in your paper that's due in week 7, it's our cumulative final exam type of paper that you will choose. Take your topic and take your org comm approach, and then write an analysis of the topic using that approach. If you want detailed explanation and information, it is in week 7. Essentially, the paper is a significant paper. It's going to be about 5 to 8 pages, where you're going to spend some time analyzing those 2 things and providing a lot of sources to justify why maybe conflict resolution styles are effective the way they are in organizational communication, utilizing the particular approach you choose to justify that with. More instruction will be coming forward in the coming weeks. This week, like I said, just 300 words and telling me which topic you picked and why, and which approach you want to use and why. It's designed to get you going and looking at it from a new perspective. So as we move into some concepts related to org comm this week, related to conflict management processes, it's important to know that we should be able to really understand and define organizational conflict and explain its stages at the various levels at which they occur in an organization by the end of not just this week, by the course. I want you to be able to recognize various conflict styles, identify their effectiveness, and appreciate ways in which a style's approach may fall short in analyzing organizational conflict. It's really important that we learn and we understand the role of third parties in conflict negotiation, especially the processes of mediation and arbitration, and understand how personal, relational, organizational, and cultural factors, those approaches, can influence the conflict process. It's really important that we start to develop and appreciate the need for an alternative approach to conflict, and start to see how this really can affect our organizational flow, structure, and communication practices in an organization. When we look at conflict, it's important that we understand, for the scope of this course, we understand what exactly a conflict is. There are numbers of different definitions about conflict in academia and everyday life. Putnam and Poole have developed a definition that's really useful in highlighting several critical components of conflict in organizations. Putnam and Poole define conflict as an interaction of interdependent people who perceive opposition of goals, aims, and values, and who see the other party as potentially interfering with the realization of those goals. Really, this definition of conflict highlights 3 general characteristics that we think of as the 3 I's in conflict: incompatible goals, interdependence, and interaction. Understanding what incompatible goals is central to most definitions of conflict in any arena that you look at. It really can involve a plethora of issues in an organizational setting that really can inhibit management and labor and the process of the organization itself. It really is disruptive to the organizational procedures and making it difficult for people to really get their job done. It's important that when we look at interdependent or interdependence and conflict that arises. It's not, it deals when the behaviors of the organization are independent on one another. So consider a situation where a manager supports participative decision-making while another believes in an authoritative management style. This incompatibility can exist harmoniously until interdependencies develop between the two managers. So since they're interdependent on one another, their management styles can create a conflict. So as such, we need to really make sure that we really are looking at how the interdependencies on one another within an organization can minimize conflict. And really, the definition of conflict really highlights the third aspect, which is interaction in an organizational conflict. That is the expression of incompatibility and not the mere existence of incompatibility. These ideas highlight the importance for communication in the study of conflict. Putman and Poole have been noted for arguing that communication constitutes the essence and essentiality of conflict, and that it undergirds the formation of opposing issues, frames perceptions of the felt conflict, translates emotions and perceptions into conflict behaviors, and sets the stage for future conflict. Thus, communication is really instrumental in every aspect of conflict, including conflict avoidance or suppression, the open expression of opposition, and the evolution of issues. So as we look at this, we need to understand that there are 3 levels of organizational conflict. Most of the attention and research and scholarship related to organizational communication conflict has really spent a lot of time at the level of interpersonal conflict. This is where an individual member of an organization has a perceived goal of incompatibility. The conflict can also be presented in the form of intergroup and interorganizational conflict. Those are the 3 types of organizational conflict. Intergroup conflict considers that people within an organization, work teams, departments, and such, have some type of conflict amongst themselves rather than the organization as a whole. Interorganizational conflict involves the disputes between 2 or more organizations, the kind of conflict that arises through competition in the marketplace, perhaps between 2 stores competing for the same market, 2 firms trying to win the same consulting contract, whatever it may be. It's between 2 organizations. So as we looked at this, I wanted to spend some time looking at Pondi's model of organizational conflict. It says that conflict really occurs in 5 stages: the latent conflict, perceived conflict, felt conflict, manifest conflict, and then the aftermath of the conflict. As you look at this, you'll see that organizational conflict goes through several phases before it manifests into a communicative interaction. Latent conflict involves a situation in which the conditions are ripe for conflict because of interdependence and possibly incompatibility between the parties. Perceived conflicts occurs when one or more of the parties believes that incompatibility and interdependence does in fact exist. And of course, it is possible to have latent conflict without perceived conflict, but you do need to know that it usually occurs in that order. Felt conflict is when the parties begin to formulate strategies about how to deal with the conflict and consider the outcomes that would not be acceptable and would be acceptable. These strategies and goals are intact in the communication during the manifest conflict phase. Finally, the last phase discussed by Pondi is conflict aftermath, which emphasizes that conflict can have both short-term and long-term effects on individuals, their relationships, and functioning within the organization. So as we look at it, we can see the role in which communication plays a role in the phases of organizational conflict. The manifest phases where we really see conflict is being enacted through communication. Interaction may involve cycles of escalation and de-escalation, as well as various strategies that are used to minimize or deal with the conflict itself. As we begin to wrap things up, it's important that we need to understand that the approaches to organizational communication in terms of conflict really deal with those 3 things that we've been discussing in this lecture. We know that there are 3 levels: the interpersonal, intergroup, and interorganizational, but that when we look at our definition of organizational communication conflict, it's important to know that it's defined as the interaction of interdependent people who perceive opposition of goals, aims, and values, and who see the other party as potentially interfering with the realization of their goals. The 3 I's of conflict, incompatibility goals, interdependence, and interaction, really begin to help us move into Pondi's stage of managing and handling conflict within an organization. As we recap some of these things, make sure you remember to read thoroughly Chapter 9. You watch the 3 videos presented in Blackboard and complete the 3 assignments we have. Don't forget it's discussion board number 5, which is due on Friday, your case study, which is due on Sunday, and your critical assignment topic, which is due on Sunday. Don't forget to post your replies to the discussion board no later than Sunday as well. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. I look forward to interacting with you and pray you all have a blessed week.